Good evening, everybody. Tonight is June 18th, 2024. This is the Upper Dublin School District Finance Committee, and I will call the meeting to order. We have, as is typical for a June Finance Committee, a rather long agenda tonight. Some items big, some items small. So let's get started and crank through it, starting with, are there any announcements?
There are no announcements this evening.
All right, we do have minutes from our May 14th Finance Committee meeting. Members of the committee, anyone have any comments, questions, or are we good to move those ahead? Yeah. All right, thank you. So we'll move those ahead to the legislative, and we'll jump into our reports and recommendations, starting with summer maintenance work. Bob?
Yes, so we went into RFP for three larger jobs throughout the district this summer for painting, pressure washing, and concrete repairs. For painting, same as last year, CertaPro Painters was our lowest cost for the buildings that we've selected for painting this year at $15,396. We went out for pressure washing, again, Fort Washington and the high school. And this time it was Southampton Window Cleaning was the lowest proposer at $12,750. And at Thomas Fitzwater, we have sidewalk repairs to make and complete an ADA ramp in the rear of the school. And that price was Michael D. Lorenz Concrete at $12,000. All three companies you either have worked with in the past or are very reputable with school districts and companies in this area.
All right, thanks. Any comments or questions from the committee or the rest of the board? All right, we'll move that one ahead to the legislative. Yes. Yes. All right, thank you. We have a contract change order at Sandy Run.
Yeah, so we still have a few outstanding items as it relates to our construction project at Sandy Run Middle School. As you know, we're almost 2 years since opening that building, but we've still got a couple straggling items. So with our prime contractors, we have our general contractor that has $75,000 remaining on their contract with open allowances of a little over $37,000. And then our electrical contractor, Borough, the contract still has a little over $90,000 on it with a remaining allowances of $80,000. So this change order that we have on the agenda tonight actually brings us one step closer to closing out the electrical contractor contract now that the big outstanding item related to the solar panels is completed. So what this change order does is it will close out the remaining allowance balance of $80,255.45 and will reduce the final payment due to Borough Construction to $10,131.97. And then once that's approved, Borough will prepare their final payment application to be able to close out that contract. And then the Skepton construction contract remains open as we're waiting on some final items for the township land development agreement to close those out. And then once we have that, we can work on closing Skepton out. And we will continue to work closely. So Dewey Engineering is still working closely with us to make sure we get those contracts closed out. So again, tonight, this is a change order to reduce the contract balance for Borough Construction electrical contractor by $80,255.45.
All right, thank you. Any comments or questions, Jeff?
I just want to state that consistent with what I've done for other matters for borough developers recently, to avoid any appearance of conflict, I'll be abstaining on this at the legislative meeting, and consistent with that, I'm not going to take a position on moving it forward this evening, just so that I'm completely out of the loop on this one. So appreciate that.
Yep, understood. Any other comments or questions from the committee or the rest of the board? All right, so we'll move that ahead. Yes, all right, thank you. Disposal of excess, obsolete, and non-repairable equipment has a wide variety of items. Anything to call our attention to this month?
I will just call your attention to the one about the SOL championship trophies that are on the list. So I did follow up with Mr. Highland just to get some information on this. And again, what he confirmed is essentially the trophy cases that we have in the high school here are basically full. There's no more room for additional trophies. I guess that's a good thing, and it's a testament to the success of our athletic teams over the years. But what he's recommending and what we've already started and consistent with some other school districts are doing, they're moving more towards what he calls perpetual plaques. So it kind of takes all of the information off of these individual trophies and puts them onto plaques that go into the cases, which frees up room and allows for more space for us to continue to show all the successes that we're having in our athletic programs. So that's what he's doing here. So the recommendation is to give the trophies to the booster clubs to attempt to track down the person and potentially give it to them instead of just disposing of these items and throwing them away or trying to find a storage space for them in the buildings. He's also found that they're doing this with trophies and older uniforms and trying to find ways to potentially for booster clubs to raise money or find old athletes to share these with as mementos. So that's the recommendation. I figured I'd note that item, but if there's any other questions about the disposal, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right, yeah, thanks for that one. I was going to ask, any other comments or questions? No. All right, we'll move that forward.
Yes.
All right, thank you. I'm going to pull forward item M, just so we have a long agenda and Prakash doesn't need to stay all night. So we have an agreement with Chester County Intermediate Unit for rubric data backup services. You want to introduce that, Prakash?
On? Okay. So this year, one of the things that our department focused on is reviewing our existing data backup system. And in going through this process, we met with the MCIU, who shared with us current standards, current practices, and procedures that we need to be mindful of when looking at data backup systems, recovery, time lapse, data that is encrypted and so forth. And in going through the process, the IU also helped us identify Rubrik as the platform that should be considered for data backup. One of the main reasons for it is our data would be immutable, which means that it cannot be written over. And additionally, in the event we ever needed to use the backup data, the downtime to recover our virtual servers, our data itself, it could be done within a daytime period. And so there are a lot of benefits for us to move to Rubrik platform as our next data backup system. The contract is going to be through CCIU. It's not with Rubrik. CCIU would be providing us with all the technical support. So our team is sort of hands-off in the day-to-day management of that data. We set it up, we configure it, and then the IU provides us with any necessary support in the event of. I'll take any questions that you guys may have.
All right, thanks, Prakash. And just as a reminder for the committee and the board and disclosure for the public, a portion of data backup is related to security, and therefore it is an executive session topic, and we have had a brief discussion about that at executive session as well. So with that, Jenna, go ahead.
I just have, so why are we working with CCIU? Does MCIU not, I know they made the recommendation for Rubrik, but do they not have the same relationship with them? Is that why we're doing CCIU?
Correct. So CCIU
Okay.
has the consortium group pricing through them. Correct.
Anyone else? All right, so we'll move that one forward.
Yes.
Yes, all right. Thank you, Prakash.
Thank you.
Jumping back into the agenda, the finance portion, monthly financial reports.
Yes, thank you. So what you see before you tonight are our financial reports for the month ended May 31st. You can see our normal typical reports here. Our total receipts are in line with prior year, slightly ahead at 98% compared to 96% of budget. And total expenses are in line at 84% of budget compared to 81%. Again, I think one thing to note, just some of those numbers are slightly low. Yes, we are trending a bit under budget, but we do still have large salary-related items that get paid out in June related to our teachers' contract. So lump sum and teachers get paid through the summer. So while those numbers do seem a little low, it's very much in line with where we've been at this point of the year in prior years. In the other financial reports, there's nothing much to highlight. Everything's trending very much as anticipated. I will spend a minute, though, on the financial projections. We have quite a bit to cover tonight, but the financial projections play into one of our next items related to our capital reserve transfer. So this report is updated with May actual expenses and revenues, along with updated projections through June. As I mentioned, there are still a lot of items that we have to come through to receive, to record payroll. So we've estimated quite a bit of that out, but there's still a lot of expense and revenue to come through to be actualized and to record. So we still have quite a bit of estimates in these numbers. But what you see here is that the projected surplus is increased from $5.6 million last month to $7.2 million this month, and it's a change of $1.6 million. And the primary reason for that is something that we did discuss when these projections were first presented back in March, was we had a commercial property that had a large delinquent tax balance that went unpaid at the end of December. We knew they were eventually going to pay that. We just had no way to anticipate the timeline with that. So again, it's been delinquent since January 1. They just paid it in May. That could have potentially went outstanding until next year while collection efforts happened. So they paid it, we recorded it, and it is now reflected in our numbers. So again, that's the main reason for the increase. As you can see, other than that, things did not change all that significantly. So I will stop there. Again, I know we have a lot of financial items to cover tonight, but if there's any specific questions about our monthly financials, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right, comments or questions on the monthly financial reports? Okay, so we'll accept those and move those ahead? Yes, all right, thank you. Anything exciting in budgetary transfers?
Yeah, there's just a couple larger items. Again, not items that we have not previously discussed, but I'll just give a quick reminder about them since they're on this month. So you can see item number 2 is about $440,000. And again, what that is one of the drivers for our surplus this year was related to salaries and benefits, and $2.2 million of that being related to some turnover, teacher UDEA, our teacher contract leaves of absences that generated savings. What we did talk about was on the other side of that is we did see an increase in substitute costs for some of those openings that were beyond what we could possibly project. So we're taking money to cover those additional expenses and our substitute costs there. Again, that's something we did talk about, but the budget transfer is here this month to be approved. And then the second item is related to the purchase of Chromebooks with our federal ECF funding. So that's another one that we did talk about. That was something new that came up this year. We had an opportunity to go receive some federal funding to buy the Chromebooks this year. We didn't plan to buy Chromebooks this year because it would have been in next year's budget, but we had the opportunity to utilize ECF funding. It needed to be received by June 30th of this year. So we have expense, we have an offsetting revenue, so net to the budget, there was no impact, but we did need to record both of those things as expense and revenue, and thus a budget transfer to make sure we cover that now that we have the bill in front of us. So other than that, I think everything's in line, and if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Anyone have questions on the budget transfers? Titia.
Yeah, and the number 6, the nursing substitutes, is that's the 350, right? Correct? Or is oh no, sorry, I'm misreading. My apologies. Sorry, forget it.
Anyone else have comments or questions on the budget transfers? All right, so we'll move those ahead?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Now we're on to the transfer to capital reserve. This one, so we have multiple transfer to capital reserve. Do you want to take them together, or how do you want to handle that? All right, so we'll cover them. So, all right, so we'll handle these as two separate items, starting with the surplus transfer, which is item F.
Okay, thank you. So for this first transfer, this is the transfer that we've talked about. It's the same process we went through last year. So we have a planned transfer in our budget of $3 million for the 23-24, the 2023-24 school year, and we broke that into two parts. The board approved a transfer of the $3 million, which has already been completed per our budget, and what we've been talking about at these meetings over the last couple of months is similar to what we did last year, was taking the surplus at the end of the fiscal year, the projected surplus at this point, and transferring that to the capital reserve to handle all of our future capital projects that we have, which again, the schedule is included in my recommendation, and we've talked about it in prior budget presentations. So this month is that second recommendation related to our surplus, or which is the excess of revenue over expenditures in the current fiscal year, which aligns to the projections that I just presented to the board. So I'm currently estimating a surplus of about $7.2 million, and again, consistent with my recommendation remains to transfer that full surplus to our capital reserve fund. The reason for that is, again, we have, after this transfer, we would have about $37 million in the fund at the end of this year, and we have $32 million of capital projects identified over the next 5 years. And the important thing is those capital projects that we have identified over the next 5 years do not include, again, we just talked about last month Jarretttown and doing an evaluation of that. It does not include Jarretttown beyond a renovation. It does not include a transportation facility as we continue that discussion. It does not include the Fort Washington landscaping improvements, and it does not include, in the next 5 years, we'll need to talk about Thomas Fitzwater Elementary School and a below-the-ceiling renovation. We're doing more of an HVAC lighting above the ceiling renovation. We are in the process of doing that right now. So we've got large items. We're not moving that money aside for what-ifs or maybes. We have real projects that are in front of us over the next 5 years, and that's why we are making efforts to fund that with cash as much as we can. So just to let you know the mechanics of how that will work, similar to last year. So we have an estimate of that surplus right now of $7.2 million. At the end of the year, as we close out the year and go through our audit, we would finalize that number. We would continue to bring updates to that projection back to the Finance Committee through the end of the audit. And then what would happen is we would record that expense in our audit or in our end of year financials for the audit. And then when we close the year next year, we would bring back to the committee and ultimately the board for approval the final surplus amount and make a final decision on the surplus, because it will not be exactly $7.2 million. It could be plus or minus that, on what that final surplus transfer looks like. And that must happen before December 31st of 2024. And again, only at that point would the money actually move into the capital reserve fund. So again, my recommendation based on what I just laid out is to approve the $7.2 million transfer, and then we would bring back the final number through a reconciliation process and after our audit, hopefully by the end of November, but it has to be done before the end of December next year.
Comments or questions, starting with the committee? You're good. You don't have comments or questions?
Not on this.
Okay. I have a question. I'm not clear why the 1.5 million of value engineering credits from Utica is in this one and the 500-something thousand is in the next one. So in the end, it's not a material difference, but is there a reason why we're treating them separately?
No, I think it's, are you talking about item V here, how it's noted in here? Yeah. Yeah, so the only reason I have that noted there, that sort of gives an idea of going back to why revenues are trending ahead of our budget and why expenses are trending below budget. So that's the only reason I included it here. The $1.5 million is part of what's driving our $6.7 million better than budget on the revenue side. So it's only noted here as what's driving the revenue.
All right, anybody else? Jeff?
Andy, just so I'm clear, I know you said that, like, the projections below for the 32 million don't include Jarretttown. There's about $10 million that's for, like, HVAC and lighting and what have you. So if the recommendation came back to just do that, we'd be at 10 million. Obviously, things over that might be in excess of that. Is that a fair characterization?
That is a fair characterization. I think at that point, if we decided to do, if the board ultimately decided to do something beyond the renovation that's in here, this $10 million, we would have to have a discussion if we want to utilize that 10 million to offset it or not. But yes, absolutely.
Any other comments or questions? Jen?
Can you just explain the process, when the money goes into the capital fund and it can only, it's earmarked for certain things, right? It cannot come out of there for anything else.
Correct. So on the last page of the recommendation, it's page 42 in the packet, it lays out what the expenditure, what these funds, when they're transferred, can be utilized for. So the funds would not move from the general fund to the capital reserve fund until after the audit is complete and we make a final recommendation. However, whatever the recommendation is, if we make like a large change from that, it could be noted in our audit. So I think we want to make sure we stay within what we're comfortable there, and we want the number to be as close to what we've estimated for the audit. Once it's moved, yes, it can only be used for certain things: capital improvements, replacement of and additions to public works and improvements. We can use it to purchase school buses, and the construction of new buildings and debt service associated with those projects can also fall within the parameters. So yes, it can only be used on capital projects once it's moved over, which is why we're being very careful to identify all of our capital projects and make sure how we're funding the capital reserve fund aligns to the work that we have to do.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, so we'll move this item on. Yes? Yes, all right, thank you. And so let's move on to the second one.
All right, and this one is related to our ongoing insurance claim. Again, this took a whole lot longer than I was hoping for, but Utica has finally confirmed for us that as part of our ongoing insurance claim, we have value engineering credits that they have approved, and we received the payment just a week or two ago for this, for the open value engineering credits on the project. So this outcome stems from ongoing discussions that we've been having with Utica going back to last summer. Utica has now made the district whole, so we got essentially two payments in one here. One was they owed us over $1 million for the claim, which was good. We've got that closed out. That was agreed to, that we were going to finalize everything through this year, and then we would close out the claim through the end of the year. So we received that final payment for the claim. And then this payment of $533,600 is related to a couple of items that we had that were valued as part of the claim, but we either installed a product that was less expensive, so they would make us whole for that, or just pulled things totally out of the project. As an example, the varsity softball field that we're doing now, we utilized, so the backstop was damaged, all the fencing was damaged, they valued that, they were going to replace it. We took that as an opportunity to say that field needs more support and more work on it. So we pulled that out of the project and did a larger project that we're doing this summer. It's actually roughly underway. We've got some work happening out there already. And then we can utilize these funds to help pay for that project. So the other piece of that was on the varsity and junior varsity baseball field. Working with our athletic director and the baseball coaches, they actually preferred to have the netting backstop on the fields. Well, on the baseball field, we have the netting backstop, and then we have the netting going up the side there, the foul foul pole netting. So that was actually significantly less expensive, but what our coaches and athletic director desired. So Utica agreed to take the difference between those two and pay it back to us as part of the claim. So that was a win for us. So my recommendation, again, similar to what we did with the $1.5 million when we received that back as value engineering credits, that was related to the work on Fort Washington Elementary School. We took that, we transferred it to the capital reserve because it was directly related to capital projects that we were doing. So again, my recommendation here is to take the $533,600 and transfer that to the capital reserve fund because that is directly related to projects that we're doing.
All right, thanks for the explanation. Comments or questions on this second capital reserve transfer? All right, so we'll move that ahead.
Yes.
Yes, all right, thank you. Back to the agenda, fund balance commitments.
Yeah, so what we do, this is a typical standard agenda item that we have on the agenda every year. So what you can see here is I'm not recommending any increase to our committed fund balance this year, as I believe that both that we have are currently sufficient. But what we usually do is this motion is required to leave that option open through the end of the completion of our audited financial statements for the current year. Similar to the transfer of the capital reserve, we would need to finalize that before December 31st, 2024. So it just allows some flexibility for the board as we close the year out, or if anything changes between now and then to adjust our committed fund balances. So first, I just want to take a second. We don't often talk about committed fund balances. Typically, when we talk about fund balance, we're talking about the unrestricted portion of our fund balance, which can be used for anything. So Board Policy 620 provides all the details around management of district fund balance. And it's a critical policy for us because as we make decisions around budget and other finances, we want to make sure that we're in compliance with that policy. It defines all of the fund balances that a board can have, their purpose, and how they are used. So when I talk about fund balance, I'm typically talking about unassigned. And unassigned fund balance is our savings account, the district savings account, which can be used for any purpose, and it's not restricted in any way. The policy also states that that portion of the fund balance must be between or should remain, I'll be clear, should remain in the range of 5 to 8% of budgeted expenditures. The committed fund balance that we're talking about tonight, the committed portion, is in addition to unassigned fund balance, and we have committed fund balances for two purposes. We have it for real estate assessment appeals and for healthcare stabilization, rate healthcare stabilization as we look at rates increasing over time. So fund balance commitments can only be changed or utilized per board action, so it's not like the unrestricted fund balance, so the board would actually have to take action as they would to change it or add to it and utilize it if it ever needed to be utilized for another purpose. So we currently have $2.5 million in our real estate assessment appeal committed fund balance and $2.6 million for our healthcare stabilization. I believe they're both sufficient for now. The real estate assessment appeals would be to withstand any large assessment appeals, unplanned reductions in real estate assessments. So two examples of that. We have one property owner, as I've talked about in my budget presentations, that owns 3 of the district top 10 properties that generate about $3.5 million in property taxes. That property owner regularly appeals property assessment values. So if there was ever anything large there that was unplanned, we would have that to fall back on. The other thing that we found through the tornado process that we went through was our insurance and no insurance for school districts or municipalities have insurance that covers. So you can have insurance as a business for business income loss, but there is no insurance for tax revenue loss. So we saw over 100 properties that were damaged, that had damage from the tornado that we lost revenue, half of their assessment on. Rightly so. I mean, many folks were without their home for a significant period of time, but we had no recourse for that revenue. So if we ever had a large issue like that again, this would help us with some of that loss of revenue. On the healthcare side, we currently have a district fund balance of $2.6 million. We also participate in a healthcare consortium, and we have $2.9 million in that, so $5.5 million for healthcare. We have a monthly billed premium of $800,000, so we have a little under 7 months of billed premium in our committed fund balances or fund balances for our healthcare costs. The consortium, we can only hold about 4 months worth in the consortium, so we're good there, and then we've got a little extra in our account. So I believe both of these are very sufficient where they're at, and I'm not recommending any changes, but again, this would allow us, the board, the flexibility as we close our audit next year if we needed to make any changes to those amounts.
Thank you. Comments or questions on the committed fund balances? All right, good. So we'll move that ahead. Yes. And we're on to the budget.
All right. So after 10 months of work here, we finally reached the end of our budget development process. But again, as I always mention, it doesn't really end or begin. It just kind of keeps going, and we'll roll over to the next year, and we'll start again next year. But we have reached that point where the committee and the board need to make a final decision and approve a final budget, set a final tax rate for the 2024-2025 fiscal year. So we've been working through all the details of the budget since the preliminary version was presented in November timeframe, all the way through to tonight when we'll talk about the final budget. And there's really only one adjustment that I'll present tonight, which doesn't have a negative or positive impact to the budget. It just offsets itself. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I don't plan to walk through again all the details, so we spent a good bit of time the last 3 months going over the budget. Tonight is essentially in the same form that we presented last month at the recommendation of the Finance Committee. So again, I don't plan to spend a ton of time there, but certainly we have our budget narrative. If you found anything along the way that you'd like more information on or have questions on, certainly ask, and I'll be happy to go through in as much detail as needed to cover any of those items. So again, just our typical timeline here, we are at the end. We've gone through all the steps there. Again, this is a reference slide just for anyone that might be viewing this presentation online, just to kind of keep up and see what we've been through. And then what you have here are our budget priorities, which we've talked about. And again, just a reference slide here for anyone that has not been part of this process along the way. All right, budget summary. So I'm happy to continue to present tonight a structurally balanced budget. So again, structurally balanced is where we have revenues that are coming in to exactly match and offset our expenditure budget, living within our means. So we are accomplishing that with a 2.07% tax increase. Again, that is the same amount that we presented last month. Our preliminary budget, where we started in November, was 3.61. If you remember in April when we presented the expenditure side of the budget, we were at 2.8%, and through discussions and the Finance Committee recommendation to continue to work on and drive that down, we were able to get to a 2.07% tax increase, and that's what we are presenting again tonight. The current version of the budget maintains all programs and services, so we're able to accomplish that with that tax increase. And then, as we mentioned before, our unassigned fund balance is in line with board policy here. So our proposed final budget includes revenue of a little over $121 million, along with expenses of the same amount, a little over $121 million. You can see here I always break apart total expenses of $118.2 million, and then we also have the planned transfer to the capital reserve of $3 million. So together, those equal $121.2 million. Both of those are an increase of about $65,000 from last month. And I just want to talk about the adjustment because this is something I've been working on quite a bit over the last few months. So I added $65,000 to the expense and revenue on both sides of the budget. And this is related to the Inflation Reduction Act. And we are continuing to learn more about that and understand that our project that we did at Fort Washington Elementary School is potentially eligible for a significant rebate or credit. It's a tax credit from the federal government under the Inflation Reduction Act. And specifically, it's eligible because of the geothermal that we utilized in that project. So if you remember back to when we were talking about that project after the tornado, the IRA was not in place. And it just so happens that as the IRA came to be, the project that we approved falls into the eligibility category. And also when the project was finalized and put into service also puts it in the window to be eligible for that project. What we've been struggling a little bit with is tax credits typically are not available to municipalities, school districts, anyone that doesn't actually have a tax liability or file taxes at the end of the year. But this program opened up a new way, not through a grant process. It's called a direct payment back to districts. Kind of acts like a reimbursement, but there is a lengthy calculation. There is a lengthy IRS submission process that needs to be done, and there are not many firms, including our own accounting firm, that has the expertise in this specialty area to do this work. So we've been working with folks at the state. We've been working with our professionals at ICS and CMTA to find accounting firms that are doing this work. We do have one proposal that we've received at this point from a large accounting firm in Pennsylvania, and the rate was $65,000. We think that's high. So we have one other firm that we're working with right now that we believe will give us a rate not only lower than that, but we expect their proposal to show us what their fees are, along with an estimate of what they think our reimbursement would be back from this. So assuming that, or being hopeful that we'll have a proposal to bring to the committee in August for this, we want to make sure to include this in the budget so we have the expense line item to pay for it. But again, it's a wash. It has no impact on the overall tax increase because we obviously would not move forward with that proposal unless we were going to get at least that amount, but likely more than that back as part of the process. So we felt it important to add it in here to the budget so we have a line item to prepare for it because we think this could be significant for us as we look into next year. So I'm really hopeful that we have more information to talk about that at the August meeting, but we will keep plugging along. Minimally, we do have one proposal that we could utilize, but we think there is probably a more competitive proposal out there. So again, a reference slide here with our 2.07% tax increase. You can see that the increase for a property at the median assessed value would be $154. And again, you can see the chart here that shows our tax increases over time is the orange line, and then the Act 1 index is the blue line. As a reference, the Act 1 index is 5.3% this year. So again, where we're at right now is well below that. And then the other reference slide here, we talked in detail last month, but just the homestead exclusion. Again, you can see here that while the median property tax increase is $154 increase, the state has significantly increased the homestead reimbursement to school districts that passes through to eligible homeowners of homesteads. So every approved homestead in our district will be seeing a $65 reduction in their taxes for that pass through from the state. So that is good news for everyone across the state. Another reference slide here, again, we don't have the final 2024-2025 tax increases for all of our Montgomery County school districts. We'll continue to monitor that just so we can update this when all that information is available. Like us, a lot of school districts are still going through that final process here. So this just gives you a sense of where we currently fall based on 23-24 millage rates against the school districts around us in the county. So this is a new slide, so I'll take a minute here. I usually include this in a final presentation. We did talk a little bit about fund balances, but as we approach the end of the year, we look at fund balance just to make sure we're in line here. So this gives you a sense of, as we close out the year, The column on the left is the 23-24 fiscal year, and you can see that since we talked about the capital reserve transfer tonight, and that was just moved by the Finance Committee to the legislative meeting, if that full amount of 7.2 million is transferred, we would be left with 8.77 million as our end of year unreserved fund balance. So you can see that would be 7.6% for this year, estimated at the end of the year. And then as we look at next year, the unassigned fund balance would remain the same because we have a structurally balanced budget where revenues match expenses. We're not using any fund balance to balance the budget. So we would end with an $8.77 million unassigned fund balance for next year, which is 7.2% of projected expenditures. And again, the percentage, if you're wondering, the percentage goes down because it's based on the budgeted expenditures. Budgeted expenditures are higher than where they are this year because expenses are going up over time. So the budget accomplishes all priorities along with maintaining a strong unassigned fund balance as we look into next year. Again, just a reference slide for committed fund balance. This is all the information we reviewed on the last agenda item here. So again, it's a reference. It's there. We spoke about it tonight. Certainly if there's questions about that, I can cover that, but I won't go through that again. This is the important one here. Again, I always like to show this slide. It gives you a sense of over time, our long-term trend, where we were in the past revenues and expenses, and then how we're trending over time here. So the gray line on the bottom are revenues. The red line are our expense trends based on our assumptions that we utilize for the next 4 years. And then the blue line is those same assumptions with the $3 million transfer built in here, built into that. So right now, again, we don't have that built into the projections, but I give you both so you can see them. But I think the important thing is here, the blue line adds $3.3 million. And then we next year, based on kind of what we know now, assumptions that we're utilizing with the $3 million planned into the budget next year, would start next year at about a $3.1, $3.2 million deficit. So deficit difference between revenues and expenses as we start the preliminary process next year. And you can see that drives the blue line away from the gray line out over time. So the red line and the gray line are very much in line. Again, they trend apart in the last 2 years of the projections, but I think we're in a solid financial position here without the transfer. If we're interested in continuing to maintain that budgeted transfer, you can see we're going to start at a significant deficit next year that grows out to about almost $6 million into the future in 28, 29. So there's always going to be budget open items. We've talked about that. These are the items that remain. I think the one thing just to note here, the state budget, it seems like there's discussions happening. There's still no solid movement that we're aware of at the state level. We will continue to pay close attention to that. But similar to past years, it looks like it's going to be a bit until we see any final movement on the state budget. I think last year it was quiet for quite some time, and then things happen pretty quickly, but I don't think we'll see the state budget pass before June 30th. So all these items remain open. These are typically our open items as we approach our final budget at the end of the year, and it is just part of why we trend and make assumptions and then monitor actual. And then this is our resources slide. Again, if anyone's listening at home or wants more information, all of the budget presentations that we've gone through all year long, this is the 7th one that we've done here at the Finance Committee meeting. All of them can be found online. I have a budget narrative that has 29 pages worth of detailed information about our budget, so you can certainly find all the details that you're looking for in that document. And certainly I'm sure there will be questions about some of that tonight, but I think those are the resources that we have available for anyone that is interested in learning more. And then in closing, I feel very confident that what we've presented to you, the budget that we presented, we are on solid financial footing. I believe it's responsible and continues to put the district in a strong financial position, both in the short term and the long term. And that's what I continue to monitor and show those projection trends, is that making sure the decisions that we're making today set the district up for success, not just today or tomorrow, but for the next 5 years. So that's where we're at from a budget standpoint. And if you want to do questions, I think we should do the presentation first, and then we can talk resolutions next.
Yeah, to be clear, the next item is the actual, the things we would move on to the legislative agenda, so we'll discuss that next. But first, on the presentation, comments or questions? All right, after 7 months of talking about it, I guess we feel pretty good. Jen, did you have something? Go ahead.
On the slide that okay, you talked about the median, the increase to the median household being $154. Does that include the homestead? No, so then what would a median household see? I'm sorry to put you, it's a little math, put you on the spot there.
154 minus 65.
That's $89.
$89.
$89.
Okay, so to the median property owner, they would see an $89 increase this year with what we have. Okay, thank you.
And again, I didn't mention it, just to make sure that's clear. So the $65 is the same for all property types regardless of the value. Yep.
Right, and the counter to that is that $154 is for one house. There is one house in the township that's right in the middle, that's that one, but everyone else's is slightly higher, or maybe even a lot higher or a lot lower. Yeah. And you do have to qualify for the homestead reduction, right. Anyone else have comments or questions on the presentation? All right, let's move forward to the actual resolutions.
Yeah, so there are, every year we have 3 resolutions. The drafts tonight have the 2.07% tax increase in them, along with the homestead farmstead, based on what we touched on tonight. So at a 2.07% increase, tax increase, that would set our millage rate at 38.2218, and that's what's reflected in the resolutions. The only interesting thing I'll note this year is that in the real estate tax resolution, it sets out sort of the payment period. So we have 3 windows for payments. It says the first 2 months, but that's July 1 to August 31st is the discount period. If property owner pays within that window, they get a 2% discount. September 1 to October 31 is face. That's no discount or penalty. And then November, the last 2 months. November 1st to December 31st would be in a penalty period, which is a 10% penalty. The interesting piece of that is that August 31st falls on a weekend, and then Labor Day is on that Monday. So August 31st is Saturday, Monday is the holiday. So the dates on the bills will not change, but we will accept payments through Tuesday, September 3rd at discount, just to make sure no one gets cut off by that at the end of the discount period.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. And the vast majority of our taxpayers do pay during that discount period, typically right at the end of the discount period. So, comments or questions on the resolutions? Go ahead, Jenna.
So I want to kind of tee up a conversation about the planned transfer. So the recommendation that we've been going with, that I guess we got it from ICS. It's somewhat grounded in this APPA article, but it's baked into our budget narrative, is we should be saving somewhere between 1.5% and 3% of our total facility value, which, Mr. Leckman, correct me if I'm wrong, is about $325 million?
That's correct.
Okay. So just doing some math, and this is why I have to look at my notes because there's a lot of numbers here. So that 1.5% to 3% range, if we were sticking within that, and that's not a minimum and a maximum. It's not like we can't go over 3%. It's not as though we have to save 1.5%. I just want to be clear. It's just a sort of a guidepost that we've been using. That would put us somewhere between a capital reserve transfer of $4.875 million and $9.75 million. So we just voted to transfer $7.2 million in from the surplus to capital reserve. So if we keep the $3 million placeholder that's in the budget, we'd be transferring $10.2 million in total between those two things, which is about 450,000 over that 3% kind of higher end of the goal. And I was fine with that last month when the estimated surplus was 5.6 million. And again, it's good news that we had that, payment that increased the surplus to, this estimate of 7.2. But now we'd be saving over the 3%. And that literally just changed in the last month. So if anybody's wondering, why didn't we talk about this last month? I would have brought it up then, but things have changed. So what I'd like to propose is a reduction of the planned transfer so that the total that we're transferring between the surplus that we didn't vote on it, we recommended we move it forward and we'll vote on it next week. The combination of that and the planned transfer would be no more than 3%. So again, using hard numbers, I'm proposing we reduce the planned capital transfer from 3 million to 2,650,000. 550,000.
All right. Would anyone else like to comment? I will say that 1.5% to 3%, last year I did do a bit of research on that just to clarify for everybody, because I don't know if I've shared it with everybody, and to figure out where that number came from. So we heard it from ICS as a recommendation, so I asked ICS where they got it, so I had something I could actually read and cite. And they couldn't find a document that it's a rule of thumb that they've used in their industry for a long time, but they couldn't find a document to support it. But what they did find was another document that I also independently found from the federal government from 1990, hasn't been updated since, and is very frequently cited, that recommends 2 to 4%, not 1.5 to 3. So we're not sure where the 1.5 to 3 came from, but the number that ICS came back, the document that ICS came back with and recommends 2% to 4% of total replacement value as the amount to set aside for your entire maintenance and repairs budget, which is not exactly the same as capital reserve. But that's the closest thing we have to some kind of official source for where that number might come from, just for clarification purposes.
So just so that and yes, totally, I agree with all of that. I'm going to completely hypothesize that maybe part of the reason for why that paper says 2 to 4 and their recommendation is 1.5 to 3 is, I think some of the things that are recommended in the 2 to 4, some of that we actually pay not from capital reserve. So maybe that's why I'm completely hypothesizing. But so to be clear, to put this in hard numbers, even if we reduce the planned transfer by 450,000, we're still going to, in total, between the surplus we just voted on and the planned transfer, we'd be transferring 9,750,000, even with that reduction.
Jeff.
Jen, I appreciate that. I get it. Conceptually, I hear you, but my gut is going against you, and here's why. I know that your numbers derive from the end of your surplus, and I know that sort of gets translated forward, but it's developed from things in the past. And so my concern is that we're using something from the past to derive a piece of the future. And I know, I'm kind of saying we're mixing apples and oranges, and in a very real sense, we are, but we're not at the same time. So it's not a pure analogy, it's just the way my brain works. So to me, the idea of planning a consistent number has value and merit if we can stick to it in circumstances. And I'm not sure that the fact that there was a surplus last year is a circumstance where, at least for me, it would lead me to reduce that planned number. I couldn't tell you exactly what would lead me to reduce that planned number, but since we're balanced structurally as we are, and we've got that number in the budget to protect the future, as Andy said, and it resonated with me when he said short-term and long-term. And to me, that really has meaning. And as much as I think that your $450,000 reduction, would be appreciated because it would in turn reduce the tax increase, I feel that we are sacrificing a little bit of the protection of the future. And because of the reason given, to me, it just doesn't get me there to do it. So that's kind of where my head is right now.
My thought on this is I actually would rather increase the plan transfer to an actual 1% instead of the steady, and we've discussed this at past meetings, instead of the steady 3 million, because it's a number that I think should increase over time because costs for capital projects increase over time. And it should be built in for the future, just as, the document recommends 2 to 4. I'm good with 1. I don't think we need to get all the way to 2 to 4 as the plan transfer. And there will be a surplus, we hope. There should be a surplus if we're doing our jobs properly every year. I do think that the surplus has been on the large side the last couple of years, and I think that's a lot of what's driving this conversation. And so what I would like to do is just see us continue, and we have made progress, but we need to make more. I continue to make progress on, especially on the revenue side, reducing those surpluses by projecting more accurately. And crystal balls are really expensive these days, and we don't have a great one. But I think that's where I'd like to put our effort is in continuing to reduce the surplus each year. But there will be a surplus in it, and we do have needs that are documented for that money. So setting us up for long-term success. So I think it's still the right thing to do. And coupled with that, if we were talking about, a 5.3% tax increase where the Act 1 index is this year, I might have a really different attitude about it. But our tax increase this year and for the last several have been really quite moderate, and I don't feel the need to drive it down further. I'd much rather set us up for long-term success. So I'm happy with the plan as is, and next year I'll be pushing for a larger than 3 million plan transfer. Anyone else? Alima.
Jenna, I can definitely appreciate the lens that you're taking at with how are we responsible for the surplus that we're having, and what can we do to reduce it in some way, and then ultimately the impact will be on our taxpayers within the community, which we are all taxpayers within this community as well. What concerns me the most is I look back at that Protect the Future slide, and we look at where that 3 million puts us. If we do it and if we don't do it, and that's really the trajectory that I want to not only drive the tax rate down for the current taxpayer, which in April we were at 2.8, now we're at 2.07, which is the work that Andy and his office did to really find that in the budget and drive it down significantly. What I'm excited about in terms of where we're landing is we're below inflation rate, which is currently at 3.3%. We're projecting 2.5%. Our staff is increasing year over year. So we're below that number. We're below the Act 1 index. We're below our competitors. Well, not competitors, but our neighbors. We're not competing with them. We're frenemies. But all of that to say is that I'm proud of where we are. I think it shows responsibility, not only for today's taxpayer, but for the future taxpayer as well. And I think we keep having the conversation of how we drive it down further and further, but we look at other places that are more, like, that we can take year over year rather than a one-time break on that. So that's where I'm at. I'm proud of where we are right now. I think it shows the responsibility of the district. And one last thing I want to add is if we think about all of the expenditures that we have planned, if we take 10 million and borrow 10 million, we'll pay back $21 million to a bank. If we have that $10 million in cash, we pay $10 million. So for me, it's just responsible, definitely what we have on the books, not including a number of projects that we currently do not have projected for. So I appreciate it. I wish we would have started the conversation earlier in the year to see what we could be at in terms of 1.5, but for now, I'm satisfied with the 2.07.
Anyone else? John?
So I may repeat some of what Alima just said, but Jenna, I do appreciate, trying to get the tax rate as low as possible. Also a taxpayer in the district, I understand what that looks like, and I think it's always our responsibility to make the taxes as low as possible while still balancing the educational needs of the community. And so I want to thank you for putting that forward. I was influenced by that slide, Andy, of the long-term, the capital projects. And, I think you said we'd have 37 million in the fund, 32 million are for projects already identified. And so there's a number of projects that are going to cost us beyond that $37 million, right? And so you talked about, does not include Jarretttown beyond the renovation, beyond the funds we've already earmarked, the transportation facility, Fort Washington landscaping, Thomas Fitz, and below the ceiling renovations. There's a lot of work in front of us to do. And so my fear is, we may get the tax rate lower this year, but that may result in higher tax increases in subsequent years. And Lima, I think that you're right on about, if we borrow $10 million now, it's a higher, cost to us long term. There's also the cost of not having the funds on hand now that we can invest. And so having the cash on hand allows us, hopefully, to keep the tax rate low and hopefully lower longer term. But there's a lot of work in front of us. And so I think taking the long view here is wise. 2.07 is, looking historically, where our tax rates have been pretty low, pretty good. Would I love it to be lower? Yeah, of course I would. But also recognizing there's work to be done and these things cost money. And so I'm also proud of where we landed. This was a good conversation, a good discussion. And Andy, I want to thank you for all the due diligence and helping us get to the number that we've gotten to.
Any other comments? Titya?
Yeah, I think the last few years have taught us that you need to be prepared for the unexpected. And I think it's the board's role to look long-term, not just for the year ahead. And I think for that reason, while the surplus this year is larger than I expected it to be, I think next year's budget, the budget process next year, if that could be tightened up. But with that said, we also have gone through some changes in the district in terms of leadership. We're seeing some needs in areas where we definitely will need to spend money. So I think keeping a tax rate definitely below the inflation rate, below the Act 1, and somewhat consistent with over the last few years, I think that makes the most sense to me at this point. I'd rather have it somewhat the same year over year rather than have big spikes and unexpected fluctuations, so that people have some idea of what might be happening. I think some of our peer districts we're seeing go up pretty substantially higher. And I would like us to be able to avoid that, especially with the prospect of our projects in the next few years. So I'm okay with the 2.07. But thanks, Jenna, for bringing that to the attention.
Anyone else want to comment on these? Jen, you have something else?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that Jenna brought this up so we could have this thoughtful discussion. I am worried about the projects coming, and like Alima said, having to borrow money for those projects in the future, we would lose out there. So I am okay with the 2.07. Thanks.
Anyone else? Just want to clarify one comment I made earlier. I said next year I would be pushing for a larger plan transfer. And that what I mean is I'd be pushing for sticking with 1%, which at this point is slightly more than 3 million. So I hope the plan transfer will be larger. I also, at the same time, hope that the surplus transfer will be smaller, because I hope that the surplus is smaller. So the total transfer may be smaller, but I think we need to continue to have that plan transfer there for the long term, basically forever. But I hope that we can get the surpluses down to make up for some of that. All right. With that, so we have multiple, in this agenda item, we do have multiple resolutions. We have the one for the final budget adoption. We have the one for the real estate tax, which are closely tied together, and we have the Homestead Farmstead Exclusion Act reduction, which is something we must pass. It's dictated from the state, and we have no real control over any of that, but we do need to pass the resolution. So with that, are we prepared to move all three of these ahead to the legislative meeting? Oh, I'm sorry, Mary Beth.
Kind of a separate issue from Jenna.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. Yes.
Just kind of taking a look through the whole budget and seeing the recent additions of positions that have been posted and that were out, have searches out for. Kind of in the conversations that led up to the decision to add the assistant superintendent position, kind of the vision was shared of that being close to being a revenue neutral situation, with a vision of maybe some restructuring that might happen among the administrative team. I realize that vision isn't fully articulated or discussed, but I kind of supported that decision on the basis that that would be happening. And there have been some personnel shifts more recently, like after the last legislative meeting and all the different budget discussions. So I just wanted to raise the idea of adjusting that administrative salary budget to reflect the idea that that would be more of a revenue neutral decision of adding the assistant sup position. And then, if there might be some restructuring, that's something that we take step by step and present different ideas and discuss those in a public venue. So I just wanted to raise that for a point of discussion. Hopefully I articulated that clearly.
All right. Anyone like to comment on Mary Beth's proposal? So what I remember from that discussion, and again, like something we discussed earlier, personnel is something that is frequently discussed in executive session, so not all of this conversation has happened in public, but the idea that, as I took it, was, and put it forth, that it is frequently the case that when you have new leadership, there is inevitable restructuring that comes later after some time. We talked about adding an assistant superintendent position and then giving that assistant superintendent some time to assess and make recommendations and that kind of thing. And so any restructuring would happen later, and we're not, as Mary Beth said, we're not quite there yet. So I'm not prepared at this point to make any adjustments until we let that process play out. But does anyone else have comments? Jen?
The money that was that's set aside for that, those salaries. That can be moved, unlike the capital reserve fund, correct?
Right, so anything approved in the budget could go through the budget transfer process if needed, like we talk about every finance committee, if it needed to.
Right, so it's not-
I'm not suggesting anything there, but that it's not like the capital reserve, which once it's moved to the capital reserve, it can only be used for capital reserve. Any line item in the budget could be adjusted as needed to meet the district needs.
Right, so it's not, it doesn't have to be spent there when we get an assistant superintendent and it's not, that money that's sitting there right now is not needed for that, can go somewhere else. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Lori.
Thank you, Mr. Sirota. So just to clarify a little bit, when I presented the assistant superintendent position, I did present the idea that once that person was on board, we would consider some restructuring of the teaching and learning department and discuss with you some ideas that I had, but also wanted that person to be able to put their lens and their perspective on that. We have had some changes in that department that, as Dr. Thomas alluded to, have materialized in the last couple of weeks that might accelerate that process, but it continues to be our recommendation that the salary for those positions continues to maintain in the budget so that we have that opportunity to restructure. And maybe there will end up being a cost savings at that point. It's too early to be able to project what that might look like. Again, waiting for an assistant superintendent to be able to provide some input into that as well, similar to what you said, Mr. Sirota.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. So with that, members of the Finance Committee, we're prepared to move these final budget resolutions to the legislative meeting? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm fine to move it forward, because that's really what we're voting on. But substantively, I kind of stick with what I said.
Understood. Item K, insurance policy renewals.
Yeah, so our insurance policies are renewed on an annual basis. We would typically be reviewing this at this meeting in June. We work closely, so we work with insurance broker, Willis Towers Watson. They do all of this work for us. They meet with us, discuss our needs, see if we need to make any changes. They go out and get quotes and make sure that everything is in line financially. So what you see on the agenda tonight is a blank chart, if you're looking at it. So as of when this agenda was published, we did not yet have our premiums back from Utica. Since then, we have received our final premiums, and I have the numbers that I can share out tonight, and it will be on the legislative agenda. For the 24-25 school year, there were no recommended changes to the policies that we have or what we have included in our policies. So what we quoted was based on what we have today, and we believe that sufficiently meets all of the district's risk needs. So as I mentioned, just yesterday, we received the final premium renewal amounts. The increase is about $62,000 as compared to prior year, which is a 9% increase. That increase was anticipated in the budget that we talked about tonight. We just didn't have all of the individual line items until yesterday. So the increases, Willis Towers Watson was very clear with us that the increases are not related to any district claims, so it's not related. If we can look back and say the tornado is why our rates are increasing at a 10% rate, as you are probably experiencing yourself personally, as most homeowners are, is rates are going up on insurance based on what's happening out there in the marketplace nationwide right now. So that's really what's driving our increases. You can see the increases are in all of our main liability lines. Our errors and omissions, cyber and student accident are actually the same as they were this year for the most part. So I will just share them with you verbally, but again, they will be included on the final legislative agenda. So our commercial and package premium is $413,197, so that's a 12.6% increase. Our commercial business auto premium is $126,930. It's almost an 11% increase. Our commercial umbrella premium policy is $46,961, again, a 10% increase. Our errors and omissions for school board is the exact same as it was this year, $131,636. Cyber liability actually went down, so if you paid attention to that over the last 5 or so years, that's a new insurance that was just going up by leaps and bounds every year. We finally seem like we've gotten to a point where cyber insurance companies are comfortable. They've got all the protocols and reviews in place where that seems to have stabilized. So it's a slight decrease to $24,187. And our student accident premium policy is exactly the same as last year at $13,500. So I am recommending that all of these be approved. And again, all of these numbers will be on the legislative agenda.
Thank you for that update. I'm pleased to hear about cyber liability. That one was the rate of increases over the years was really kind of staggering. Any other comments or questions on this item? All right, so we'll move that ahead?
Yes.
Yes, all right, thank you. NovaCare rehabilitation.
Yeah, so NovaCare Rehabilitation is provides our athletic training services. If you don't know Miss Katie Bartosik, she is fantastic, and I know everyone thinks she does an excellent job for us. She just finished up her 17th year with the district. Mr. Highland let me know. So again, the work she does for us is great. So at the May 2022 May 2022 board meeting, the board approved an extension of an agreement for those services through the 2024-25 year. So our actual current agreement is actually through next year. So why are we bringing this forward to you? So I think if you look across, a lot of districts are actually reaching out to districts that use NovaCare because the companies that provide athletic training services are getting out of this business, and NovaCare is kind of one of the last ones that are hanging on. And NovaCare came back to us, met with Mr. Highland and I, and gave us a heads up that they were going to need to increase rates in order to continue to keep Ms. Bartosik in this role with the district. So if you have a look at the current agreement, the recommended here, the current agreement does include a 30-day notice period. So you might say, well, we have an agreement, why can they come back to us? So it does allow a 30-day out by either side. So NovaCare did make it very clear to us that they would need to kind of move away from this agreement if we were not willing to renegotiate the rates, as other districts are seeing happen to them right now with other firms that are providing these services. So we needed to have a discussion with them and see what we could work out. The current agreement has a rate of $61,532 for next year. The proposal that you see before you tonight is a 2-year. It includes rate increase to $70,000 for 24-25 for next school year and $80,000 for the following school year. $70,000 is what we have in the budget for next year. So we did anticipate that's kind of where we would end up. And again, I think from Mr. Highland, he would just say, like I said, the athletic programs continue to be very happy with the services that we're receiving, and this is recommended to make this change.
Comments or questions? Okay, so we'll move that one ahead. Yes, all right. We covered item M earlier, so we move on to a series of settlement stipulations.
Yep, these were all open and known settlement stipulations, so we only have one more on the commercial side, and then we've got a number of open district-related ones. So the first two close out commercial owner appeals that go back to the beginning of the year. So 200 Dryden Road is owner appeal. You can see the tax reduction for next year is a little over $101,000. And then 520 North Limekiln Pike and 1925 Norristown Road. So again, they're two separate parcels on the corner of those roads, so have the same owner, so they were negotiated together. That has a tax reduction of a little over $23,000 for next year. And then the second two were district-initiated appeals, and you can see 1422 Dreshertown Road is a tax increase of a little over $10,000, and 623 East Welsh Road is a tax gain of just under $8,000. We continue to work very closely with our solicitor to get these closed out, but they do take time to work through. So our recommendation is that these are, we are comfortable with these, and we recommend approval.
I'm impressed that we're down to one. I don't remember being down to one in the past, so that's good work. Any comments or questions on any of these four settlement stipulations? All right, we'll move all four ahead? Yes. Yes, okay, thank you. Item R, food service meal prices.
Yep, this is one we bring to the board every year for approving our meal prices. It's a requirement to get these approved every year. So after reviewing this with Ms. Deli and looking at her budget projections, again, a part of our budget narrative, if you haven't had a chance to look at it. So we are both very comfortable recommending no increase to lunch prices for the 23-24 school, or 24-25 school year. So they are the same as this year, which is elementary is $3.10 per lunch meal, and middle and high school is $3.35 per lunch meal. It's also important to note that the state budget now has codified universal free breakfast, so we will continue to be able to offer breakfast for free at all levels for K-12. So I know that's great for that to continue to, for us to continue to be able to offer that. I know Ms. Deli was instrumental in working, helping to work with the state to get that done. So so the recommendation is no change to lunch prices for next year.
Comments or questions? Titia.
Yeah, we all see that prices of food still are going up. So what is the actual price for lunches? I mean, the cost that our students and families are asked to pay seems reduced or seems pretty limited. So is there any change in quality, or is this really the actual cost if you do it in bulk? I know Ms. Deli is very frugal and has a lot of ways of anticipating need and can therefore purchase things ahead of time. I think I saw her with big loads of food that she was already preparing for the freezer for next school. So I'm just curious, that 310 and 335, is that the real actual cost, or what's the story behind that?
So I don't know that I have a good answer for the actual cost of the meal. I think we look at it across the entire program, because again, we get money from so many different sources. You get federal funds to pay for this, you get state funds to pay for this. So I think we look at it month by month and the program as an annual, and the food service department has been ending the year with a profit every single year, to the point where Ms. Deli is working very hard to put together a plan for replacing equipment and keeping our kitchens updated. So I don't know, I don't have an answer for you tonight to say a meal, like the cost of a meal is this. Ms. Deli is not serving any meals that do not meet all of the qualifications of the program. So I don't think we're cutting any corner, and not that you were saying that, I just don't have a better word, cutting any corners on the meals that we're providing to kids. So it meets all the program requirements that we need to be providing.
No, I mean, it seems an impressive achievement to be able to keep those prices where they are. Much appreciated.
I think it's probably worth mentioning at this point, just because we do have some new board members, and it's always a good reminder for the public that the food pricing is part of the structure of the food service budget, which is an enterprise fund, meaning it is effectively an independent business. It is not tied to the general fund. So if there are surpluses that the food service fund realizes, then those can be used to pay for things like kitchens and things like that. There's no crossover between the general fund and the food service fund. Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you. So we'll move that ahead.
Yes.
All right, we have our annual reapproval of our fund depositories.
Yes, I'm going to take the next two items together just because they are both standard required annual items to approve both the banks that we use for deposits and any cooperative purchasing agreements that we use for efficient and cost-effective purchasing. For the 24-25 year, there are no changes to any of these on both sides. So our recommendation is to approve fund depositories and cooperative purchasing agreements for next year.
Thank you. Out of curiosity, have we bought at least one thing through each of these 9 cooperative purchasing agreements over the last year?
I don't know that we've bought from all 9, but we definitely
Yeah.
utilize them and check pricing, at least
yeah,
check
well,
pricing.
Yeah,
So.
that makes sense. All right. Any other comments or questions? All right, we'll move both of these forward.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Item U, approving summer 2024 payments.
Yep, so typical annual item, we have no committee meetings or board meetings scheduled for the month of July, so this motion gives the business office the ability to continue to, the authority to continue to make required payments to vendors. Our vendors want to continue getting paid over the summer months, so we can stay active with them until the August board meeting. At the August board meeting, we would bring back any payments that go out over the summer months for ratification, so the board would still have an opportunity to see all of that and ratify in August.
Right, comments or questions? Okay, we'll move that one ahead. Yes. And our annual bids, which I appreciate is now collapsed into one item.
Yes, we did that last year, and it seemed to work really well. We started getting into double letters all the way out, so it was not good. So yes, this includes all of our annual district bidding approvals for our district supplies as we look out to next year. So we're required to do this every year. It is in all of our building and department budgets, everything that is included in these numbers that we're asking the committee to move and the board to approve. This process is a long process, and I want to thank Ms. Baldessano and Ms. Gallagher in our business office. She's been here for about a little over 2 years. She does a phenomenal job for us. So she does work from January all the way through up until this. She works with every building and department to pull all this information together, and we appreciate the work that she does. So like I said, all of these items are part of the budgets for next year. And again, I don't plan on walking through the details, but if anything stood out and anyone has a question, we'd be happy to answer.
Does anyone have any comments or questions? Okay, we'll move that one ahead as well.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And we are up through our reports and recommendations. I must say, a little bit earlier than I thought we would. And we are up to public participation. So if anyone would like to address the Finance Committee, please come up to the mic, state your name and your city of residence, or affirm that you are a resident or taxpayer in the district. And Brooke will time your 4 minutes.
Anita Brister.
How about after Ms. Brister, you come up and ask that at the mic, and then, yeah. Oh, I see. That is true for legislative meetings, but not for committee meetings.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the procedure
Yeah.
which I was inquiring about.
Yeah.
I thought maybe I came in late. That's all I was asking.
All right. Anita.
Okay, great. So many things. I did send an email to Dr. Smith, and I think I eventually copied the whole board. And I may read from part of that, but I wanted to start with taxes, of course. So some board members seem to be kind of happy that the 2.07, whatever it is, that you're increasing our taxes again. I mean, we've had like over 30 years straight of tax increases. That's unbelievable. I know some of you have not lived here that long, but when you've lived here that long and you've never gotten 1 year of zero, it's a problem. But what I want to say to those board members who are happy that what you're saying is, it appears, maybe you have data that's not in this, in your documents, that that's a lower number, a lower increase than some other districts. It may well be. I don't have, I mean, everything's still in flux, okay? It's June 30th when it becomes finalized for districts, and perhaps Wissahickon is going to pass a 4% tax increase. I really don't know right now. But I want to explain why it's nothing that we should be happy about, and it goes back to history, because there's, and I wrote this in my email, so I'm just going to read part of it. On taxes, history matters. An Inquirer comparison listed Upper Dublin School District as having the highest 10-year tax increase of all 59 suburban school districts. This, I looked up the date, it was in 2019. Actually, and then in the next year, we were also the highest. It was 45%. Our 10-year tax increase, as of that Inquirer article, was 45%. So people, picked up their Inquirer like me and said, oh, great, we're number one in something. We're number one in the highest taxes. So you may think, well, it's a few years ago, who the heck cares? It's nothing to be proud of, and the additional tax increases since then mean that we are still too high compared to surrounding districts. That's my opinion, okay? I do realize that the tax increases since then have been smaller. I do want to add in there, because this information is in the budget stuff somewhere. This might be a month ago, but it's still in there tonight. You can look up, well, Andy has it for you, how many times did Upper Dublin in past years exceed the Act 1 index? I mean, the new board members, you may not even know, but it's in this chart, which is at the end of this document, and it's 10 times. Upper Dublin exceeded the Act 1 index 10 times. That means 10 times Upper Dublin raised taxes higher than whatever that year's index was. Now, to be fair, or to be clear, 3 of those times was connected to this new high school, went to referendum, but everything else was just high taxes. So that's what we're building on. So if you get a 2% or 2.7 or 2.07 on that high base, and it's all compounded, it's a lot of money. There are a lot of people here, I mean, you should have the statistics, I could send them to you, that are on fixed income. We don't want to drive out our elderly people. At least I don't want to drive them out. We need them, okay? And they're great because you don't have to educate their kids. So you're saving money by keeping those people in the district. I also think you do have a chart in here on millage, and you said, maybe you'll update it when you have all the information from this year. That would be great. I don't think being 7th highest is good, because I've seen when we were below average for millage, and that was a good thing. Okay, I would also like to see per pupil spending. Sometimes you've had charts on that, but I don't see one in here tonight. We should be below average in per pupil spending, or maybe average. We should be below average or maybe average for millage. We should not be creeping up higher and higher every year. And, I've got 20 more minutes.
Jenny Vitale Ambler. I want to thank Jenna for being of sound mind, of suggesting we bring this down. I actually want it to be 0. I actually love a budget surplus. Andy, thank you for that, right? Better than being the other way around. Better to be conservative all year, better to have more money at the end, but the taxpayers should benefit from that. $7 million we're going to transfer. Even if we went to 0 tax increase, we only have to reduce that by $1.8 million, and then nobody gets a tax increase. We have $37,000 of our money in capital, in a fund balance here for capital fund balance, right? We put away 15 2 years ago, 5 the year before, 5 before that, 10 this year. Okay, it's a lot of money, and it's our money, right? It's our tax money. And there's a big difference between projects that you need versus projects that you want. I quick looked up the maintenance, because I think when you briefly talked about that difference of numbers up to 4% versus the 1.5 to 3 and whatever to 4, and that some of that included maintenance, so it wasn't an apples to apples comparison. We have about a $10 million budget for maintenance per year. Maybe that needs to be a little bit higher. Because maybe if we maintained our buildings better, we wouldn't have to be in a position where we have to spend millions and millions and millions of taking them down, borrowing that money. Our debt right now, I wrote down the numbers, it's huge, right? I don't think people realize it. To pay off our debt right now, it's almost $195 million. It's almost 12% of our whole budget. Maintenance is only about 7. Transportation's only 4, and that includes all the salaries. Anyway, it's a shame that we won't give back to the taxpayers. We're earning, we have a positive, one of the things positive is that we have positive interest earned on the money you have saved, but that's our money to save. We should be getting that interest and taking advantage of these high interest rates. And for those that can put that away, but there's lots of people that can't afford it. There's people that can't pay their real estate tax bill because they bought into this house so many years ago that was affordable. They can't afford to move because it's so costly to move. They can't find a house worth that much somewhere else, and they can't pay their tax bill. So $80 to you and me might not be a big deal. $180 might not be, but it's a big deal to a lot of people, especially in this economy. Lower than inflation? Great. It should be, because people have to pay for food and to live, and that is more important than us, the school district, taking that money from them and saving it for projects we don't necessarily need, but we may want. Quickly, side notes, I really want part of our maintenance budget or something to get a permanent light for our American flag in front of this building. It would save someone having to go put it up every morning, taking it down every night, and then never goes up on the weekend. So when I drive by on Memorial Day to see our American flag not up at half-mast, is upsetting. I have brought this up before. I have argued that the American flag should either, it's supposed to be the first one up and the last one down. That means no other flag should be flying. But the easiest solution to this is just to get a spotlight on that flag, and then no one has to put it up. It's just it's up all the time, and especially then someone would on Memorial Day have to put it at half-mast. So please put that in your thing. I see we've hired CertaPro painters to paint at every building except for Fort Washington, and that wall. That wall that is rusted, corroded, horrible looking. It has been horrible looking for at least 8 years when I painted the one side with the 5th graders that have just graduated. So please, can we add that to the bidding with the Certa, since they're coming out to do paint work at our buildings anyway? I'm out of time. That's all. Thank you.
My name is Anthony Carlile, Willow Grove, PA, exit 343, never forget. I'm standing here, basically, someone stole my thunder, so I'm just gonna tell you guys while I was here. About a year ago, you guys were flying the flags up and down, all different schools was doing something completely different. It caught my attention. Then there was an order, a procedure, a way, something of learning, like you instructed me that it was only a legislative meeting that you guys said to pledge. I had to learn all the rules as well throughout this whole entire process, and in which I tried to instruct you guys each time an order was out that you guys weren't following the rules, and these are just rules. I didn't know them. I asked you. You instructed me on the rules. In the future, I would, like to have someone maybe that I can call and say, on my phone I receive alerts. It's real easy. The governor sets a alert to the Department of Government Services, and that alert states which flags are to be flown at, at what level due to what reason. It's not hard. It's not difficult. And there are all different rules and such that, are out there that you can find out through these. Finance thing, I learned another rule, and the rule that is flags that to be flown with the American flags should not be an entity, an advertisement, a copyright, a trademark. And for that, I requested from the school board standards right to know law request form, and with that request form, I'm asking for the receipts for the Progress Pride flags specifically that I can see from the outside. And I'm not going to walk around the whole building, but if there are Progress Pride flags within the building, them too. But I mean specifically for the Pride flags. And again, my name is Anthony Carlio. I would like, further discussions to show you what I have learned. They're all government processes and forms Nothing that, is of opinion. This, again, I'd like to submit to actually. Thank you. Thank you for hearing me tonight.
Okay, seeing nobody else, we will close public participation. There were no comments received through the online form today, and we'll see if there are any responses, starting with the administration.
I would just say that Mr. Leckman and I will certainly look into some of the things that were mentioned in terms of facility and be able to share back with the board.
Sorry, does anyone else have responses to public participation? Or at this point in the meeting, any other comments from board members, committee members? Okay. Our next Finance Committee meeting will be held Wednesday, August 21st, 2024 at 6 p.m. here in the Cardinal Room, and we are adjourned. Thank you.